Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We positively played some football here this week, but before we talk about the Ravens' big victory over the Dallas Cowboys, got to talk about Taharka Brothers and our ice cream. We are shipping this ice cream. Luke, they let me into the factory before the game on Tuesday, and they were churning up. They told me it was eggnog day, but it was honey graham day. Now that I've seen the meticulousness and the care that is taken when making honey graham, I now have a new appreciation. The mint flicks and chills I have here, the eggnog, the peppermint bark, my favorite, the sweet potato crumble. Get the order. Get your 8-pack, $15.70 off. Use Baltimore Positive on the code at Taharka Brothers. Luke, we play football Tuesday night. Bum, 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 bum. Tuesday night football. Joe Buck and Troy Aikman seemed excited to be there, but then again, the Cowboys were there, so Troy Aikman's excited to be anywhere the Cowboys are. It was fascinating watching him call the game, especially when Deshaun Elliott just mauled Lamb down the sidelines. But I don't know what we were expecting, right? I mean, they won by 17 points. They covered the spread. They beat a bad team. They won sort of without, I don't want to say breaking a sweat. They broke a sweat, but nothing proven, right?
Yeah, it was funny. I was actually talking with another local media member in the press box prior to the game, and I was thinking about this on my drive down to the stadium on Tuesday late afternoon, that given the Cowboys profile, and we talked about this last week, I mean, I flat out told you that their defense was absolutely terrible, and it is, and we saw that on Tuesday night. But I was thinking, boy, if this were the 2019 Ravens, they'd hang 50 points on this defense, and they didn't do that. Because this isn't the 2019 Ravens.
It would have looked like what Aikman had happened to him 20 years ago, right? It would have been
only the offense doing that. Yeah,
like literally, right?
Yeah. Only it would have been the offense leading the way rather than the defense in that matchup 20 years ago that I recall so fondly.
Troy still has a little butt hurt from that, from what I saw.
But of course I didn't see the telecast, but based on what I was seeing on social media about it, he took him to task quite a few times, which, again, anyone who's watched that defense.
Poor Mike Nolan. I mean, I bled for Mike Nolan. Then I realized like Bones is covering the special teams there too. And my wife looked up after the big return. She's like, special teams don't look too special, do they? And I'm like, hey, man, that's Bones over there running defense, making the big bucks. So two former head coaches on the sidelines for coordinators for the Cowboys. But I was talking to Dennis this week about former Raven coaches, and, Marvin has my heart, and Coach Billick and I get together once or twice a week talking to clients. We were talking to our friends at Advanced Systems yesterday, Advanced Business Systems, Advanced Stuff, and Jeff Elkin. If you see him or Kristen, give him a shout out. But I had a conversation with Dennis about my favorite former coaches. Mike Nolan's one of those guys, and I think you know that. Boy, that was barely NFL quality. I mean, it really was. It was terrible, especially when you're preparing for Lamar Jackson and you just let him run through the middle on fourth down. It's crazy.
Well, and it's funny. That's kind of been a theme with the NFC East, right? I mean, Washington allowed a touchdown like that. Philadelphia allowed a touchdown like that, and kind of speaks to the overall quality of the NFC East.
Beating up on Jack Del Rio and Chip Schwartz. They're defensive coordinators all over the league, right? Literally, our former coaches.
And let's face it. I mean, we're talking about a Ravens team that's 7-5 on the outside looking in at the moment, and very fortunate to be playing the NFC East this year. And you hope that trend continues when they play the Giants later this month, although New York looking suddenly way better than they had earlier in the season. But to your point, it's a win. I don't know if we learned anything that really makes me look at this team differently than I did going into Tuesday night. I mean, certainly you like seeing how Lamar Jackson looked physically. He didn't throw the football particularly well until he dropped the dime to Marquise Brown for the touchdown. But there were several other throws where you kind of just cringed and said, "Ooh, that didn't look so good." But I expected some of that. I expected some of that from him. I expected some of that from some of his teammates who weren't around over the last 10 days and were just getting back and logged a couple practices going into this one. So, I look at Tuesday night's game. It's a win.
It felt very preseason-y. I've talked about Eddie Feiner a lot around here. It looked like sort of a sloppy, awful, sluggish, preseason-ish kind of – the whole league looked that way this week, by the way. So I know you and I have gotten together, and I'm on a full bitch tear about the league and the way they're playing, but this was my cautionary tale back in August. Are we going to be playing with half rosters in December? I don't know, but and you could talk about attrition and it's a hard fought game.
Well, it's a Tuesday
all
night
teams
weird
with
week
players.
too. I mean, we talk about Thursday games all the time because guys are out of a routine, so they're playing on a Tuesday. Which, okay, I'm not saying it's like a Thursday game, but it's weird. It's we talk about them being creatures of habit all the time. And when you're playing a Wednesday game 6 days after you were originally scheduled to play a Thursday game, which is challenging enough, and now you turn around and you play a Tuesday game, there's going to be some weirdness to that. And then you throw in everything else in the reality of a pandemic. Yeah, there's going to be some of that. But, if you're the Ravens, you had most of your guys back. You were missing Mark Andrews. You're missing Willie Snead. You're missing Matthew Judon. You end up missing Des Bryant right before kickoff, which we'll certainly talk about that, I'm sure, in great detail. But beyond that, they had guys coming back, and it certainly was a much more representative team, much more representative showing than we saw the previous week in Pittsburgh. But again, bringing it back to how this relates to the final 4 weeks, how this relates to their playoff chances, how this relates to doing something if you get into the playoffs. I'm not sure we learned a whole lot, but I will say this. We've talked a lot about the offensive line. We've talked a lot about Marshall Yanda this year because of his retirement. We've talked about the loss of Ronnie Stanley. That group's had lots of different starting combinations. Give them some credit for what happened on Tuesday night. Again, a lousy Cowboys defense. We understand that, but they did rush for 294 yards. And we've talked a lot about wanting to see some signs of this offense looking like more like last year, rushing for 294 yards. They didn't do that in any game last year. They had some games where they were very close to that, but it does speak to liking what I saw from the running game, and specifically Lamar Jackson, 94 yards on 13 carries. I think they're at this point where they are in 2020. If they're going to get into the playoffs, if they're going to win a playoff game, let's say, let alone try to do more than that, it's going to be Lamar doing things with his legs and doing more with his legs than he has for the bulk of this season. We talked about a few of the touchdown runs, but we know he hasn't run as much in many games. So they're going to have to do some of that because I'm not sure we're going to see the passing game hit a level of efficiency that we saw last year. And frankly, I don't know if he has the weapons to do that. So, even when Mark Andrews comes back here over the next week, presumably next week. So, it is what it is, but you get a win. They needed a win. They had lost 3 in a row. They'd lost 4 of 5 since the bye week. So get that winning taste back in your mouth, and now here you go. You're getting ready again on a shorter week. Not real short, but 6 days rather than your usual 7 for a regular Sunday to Sunday, and going to Cleveland to take on a Browns team that is really feeling good about themselves right now. So again, a win is a win, and you kind of look at some things that you like from this one. Certainly some things you didn't really like all that much on either side of the ball, and you're moving on to Cleveland.
Luke Jones can be found, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter and Facebook. I want to give a shout-out to our friends at Liberty Pure. I'm wearing a Liberty Pure hat right now. And, I've been pulling the websites up here a little bit. I did not know this, but Doug has coupons out on the front of the website. You can give them a call at 410-527-1024. Local water solutions and plumbing specialists. Over 7,000 customers served, many of them in the North Baltimore County, but they work all over the area. Total plumbing and water treatment. It's what they do. Liberty Pure and Liberty Pure Solutions. I'm wearing the hat on my head. Luke, I would say for a warm-up game to sort of get back into the vibe of all of this, getting Lamar back, and look, we're going to dissect every part of this in the coming couple of days as we get ready for Monday night. We're also going to check in with some of my friends out in Cleveland, Munch Bischoff, and we're going to have Daryl Ryder's going to be coming on, Michael Regai, talking about this sort of upstart Browns thing. There's something sort of scary about the Browns game on Monday night, having watched them, because all I could think about watching them was, this is a really bad team. Like, I I knew the Cowboys were 3 and whatever, and I'm thinking, well, I know Dak Prescott's not there, and I sort of fear Andy Dalton to some degree because of what he's done to us in recent years. So I respect him. I mean, it's not Spurgeon Wynn under center or J.P. Losman for crying out loud, but there's going to be a different level on Monday night for Cleveland at home with us coming out there. This is the first time the franchise has ever sort of gone into the jaws of the teeth out there in December where they have a really good team. We're sort of banged up, messed around a little bit. I thought the Cowboys was a nice warm-up to get everybody or get Calais Campbell out there running around. I know he had some problems. Marlon Humphrey had issues, short rest here, and how healthy they will actually be on Monday night.
Yeah, and again, when you're facing an opponent like the Cowboys, short of hanging 56 points on them, you do look at it in the way that we're kind of talking about it right now. It's a win. There were certainly some nice things, but there were some other things you didn't love. I mean, as it relates to the Browns, I mean, a lot of talk about their offensive line and how well their offensive line has played and how that's helped Baker Mayfield look much more like the first overall pick he was a couple years ago and playing better football than he had been really going back to the start of last year. So it's not to say that Baker Mayfield's been an all-pro, but he's looked better, and the offensive line is a big reason why. And, if there's one thing that you take away, on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, I expected Dalton to complete some passes. I mean, the one thing you can say about the Cowboys, and look, their offense might not be as bad as their defense, but don't mistake the fact that their offense, they're not very good either. But they do have CeeDee Lamb. They do have Amari Cooper. They do have Michael Gallup. They have some weapons. So I wasn't shocked, especially with no Jimmy Smith in the secondary, especially knowing that Chuck Clark missed most of the practice week with a sore knee, and Deshaun Elliott missed a little bit of practice time as well. I wasn't shocked to see that. What I was a little more concerned with, and this isn't necessarily a new concern, but it's something that we hadn't talked about maybe as much the last 3-4 weeks, and some of that had to do with opponents, but they didn't get a whole lot of heat on Andy Dalton until the fourth quarter. And when you talk about the Browns with their offensive line, which is much better than that Dallas offensive line that they trotted out there on Tuesday night that had no Zach Martin, missing other starters. I mean, that offensive line is a shell of what it was supposed to be at the start of the season. When you see them not really getting a whole lot of heat on Dalton, and yeah, there were times he got the ball out quick, but there are other times where not so much, and he had some time there. That's something that does concern you a little bit more going into Cleveland, just knowing how that offensive line has played and how that's allowed Baker Mayfield to play better football. So was good to see Jihad Ward, who first time he's been active since I believe before the bye week, had the sack, had a few other quarterback hits. I mean, he brought some pressure, especially as the game went on. And they did get to Dalton late a little bit more, but that's something, people will dwell on the fact that Dalton threw for 285 yards, and they moved the ball pretty well through the air at times.
If they would have been better in the red zone, it might have been a game for a while.
Oh, and if they had a kicker who could actually make some field goals, but that's neither here nor there. But I do look at the pressure, the pass rush, and again, acknowledging, like we talked about, Mark Andrews and Willie Snead being missing. Matthew Judon was not out there, but everyone else was for the most part with that front seven, and just that wasn't something that I was overly encouraged by, despite the fact they did get to him a little bit later in the game. But knowing what that Cleveland offensive line has been playing like, they're going to need more from their pass rush. But Brandon Williams being back, good to see. Calais Campbell didn't play a whole lot, and I think you saw it a couple points during the game that you could kind of see he wasn't 100%.
Right. He's not right. I mean,
yeah.
And I think
and that's where but you worry. Okay, how much of that is the long layoff? How much of that is the calf? How much of that is conditioning? How much of that is any remnants from the virus beyond just, hey, he hasn't played football in roughly a month? But you hope that it's more so you're easing him back in. He needed a week to get his sea legs back, so to speak, because we've talked about it. If that defense is going to match up, and not that they face a ton of formidable offenses here over the final quarter of the season, but Cleveland, look at what they did against Tennessee. They're going to need that front playing at a high level, especially knowing how the Browns like to run the football and how their passing game is very much connected to that as far as play action and what have you.
We talk about the running game being so effective, and even without Dobbins and Ingram out there running around a little bit, the Gus Bus got going. But Lamar specifically, and how special he is to see him back and running around and looking like Lamar. Even the bad part of Lamar, which is Luke, he does not throw the ball well. And when asked in an NFL game to throw the ball 25 or 30 times, sometimes on the run, sometimes moving around, sometimes on the clock. I see why he wasn't drafted. You know what I mean? I see why no one wanted to make him a passer. We're 3 years into this thing, and he'll get better, he'll get better. I think he got better circumstantially last year. In certain circumstances, bad defenses, big leads, teams not knowing how to play him.
Yeah.
He has to be more precise. And that being said, Hollywood Brown's got to catch the ball, right?
Sure.
We can go through guys catching balls. The Steelers had all sorts of problems with that the other day, right? But catching the ball is part of how well the ball is thrown. And we were really spoiled with number 5 around here. I don't want to pine away for Joe Flacco, but Joe Flacco threw the ball well. And I see other guys. Andy Dalton throws the ball well. I watched that. I don't know that Lamar is accurate in the way that you'd want him to be, or that he's ever going to be that accurate. Maybe he doesn't have to when he runs 12, 16 times a game. But we still talk about how they're going to win in January. And I don't know that he's going to have a game the way Joe Flacco looked in January 5 years ago, where he's really going to look crisp for long, long stretches, where he's going to make 30 throws in a row that look pretty good. I don't know. That's me singing out loud, just talking about what I'm seeing over 3 years. But every time the ball sails high, sails low, gets away, I'm like, I know he wants to throw the ball better. I know they work on that forever, but he's not accurate.
Yeah, and to your point, I'd say Joe Flacco earlier in his career. I wouldn't say the Joe Flacco that we saw the last 3 or 4 years.
The one running for his life,
right,
I agree.
Right,
yeah,
and checking the ball down too much, etc. But
Joe didn't read defense is great.
Well, and that's and I actually, and that's one thing that's been said about Lamar a lot. I think he sees the field pretty well. I think the question again comes back to the accuracy. And,
can he get it there?
And look, we're talking about a kid who threw 36 touchdown passes last year. So can he throw the ball better than what we've seen this year? Yeah, because we've seen that. But is it going to be consistent enough when you're in the type of environment like we've seen them up against Kansas City, like we've seen them against the Tennessee Titans last January, where when you have to throw the football because you're trailing by 10, or let's say it's just a team that's doing a really good job against your running game and they're making you play left-handed, can you play left-handed? And to this point, we haven't seen enough evidence of that. And
I'm talking 12 to 20 yards, right? And especially to the out where you're not throwing the ball 12 yards, you're really throwing it 22 yards.
Sure.
Right. And those kinds of passes, he doesn't throw them often. He doesn't like to throw them. They like that short across the middle catch and run, the arena football. They like that Kurt Warner style up underneath. But if he's got to go across the middle and throw a back shoulder, and like those kinds of throws that Kyle Bowler had to make and then couldn't in the league, he was another guy that wasn't very accurate, that you get eaten up in this league if you're playing in 3rd and 12 and you've got to throw the football and you try to throw the football and you can't do it accurately.
Yeah, and that's fair. But I'll also single out something that you did acknowledge in the midst of talking about that. Who's he throwing to right now? Seriously. It's one thing that as this season has played out, that's been frustrating for me. Look, and you mentioned this, the circumstances of last year. We talked about the passing game last year. It was such a case of all the puzzle pieces being there and fitting so perfectly. They ran at a historic rate. They set an NFL single-season record for team rushing. He set a record for quarterback rushing. Mark Ingram ran for 1,000 yards. Gus Edwards had, 500 yards, whatever it was. And they just did such a great job in that way that it just made the play-action game, it made it easy. It made throwing lanes so they were just there. And he delivered passes, and it was on time, and there was rhythm, and there was efficiency, and the offensive line protected really well. And they just haven't had all those elements this year. And Lamar's he's got to own his part of it. I'm not suggesting that he doesn't, but they don't have all those elements in place, and you're seeing it looks much more difficult. For every beautiful throw that he does make, which he did to Marquise Brown on the touchdown, and that was an outside throw, and you see that and you're like, wow, how do you bottle that up? But then you see a few throws where you're just kind of scratching your head, where he misses someone wide open, or you'll notice a lot of his throws when he's inaccurate tend to sail. And a lot of times it has to do with him needing to have a wider base, gets a little too narrow, gets a little too tall in the pocket, so to speak, and ends up throwing a little more flat-footed. But your criticism and your concern in the big picture as far as this passing game, it's hard to disagree with it. The numbers are what they are this year. They're not very good from a passing standpoint. Now, specifically on Tuesday night, when you don't have Mark Andrews, when you don't have Willie Snead, when you don't have Des Bryant, even though I have no idea if Des Bryant has much juice left. The fact that we're talking about Des Bryant as a maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they were putting him on TV 5 minutes before the game. How crazy was that? They ran a feature on him after saying he wasn't going to play, and they make this big deal out of him. Then he retires at 8:05. I mean,
he unretired later on, but before
he retired later on. They were talking about his maturity at 7:55. At 8:10, he's retiring, and I'm like, what was he going to catch 3 passes for 26 yards?
And that's the point I was trying to make, more so than getting into what happened with him Tuesday night.
What happened with him Tuesday night might wind up to the whole team being dirty on Wednesday or Thursday too. Right?
Well,
Ryan Mink tweeted that he was hugging people, whether he was really hugging. I haven't seen the videotape, but I have. We'll cover that in the next segment because we tried to stick the football in this one.
but the point I was trying to make is the fact that we're talking about him even as a maybe speaks to the overall state of this passing game. They don't have enough weapons. We talked about this a lot in the offseason when you trade Hayden Hurst, and look, trading Hayden Hurst in isolation, fine. I didn't have a major problem with that. My concern was, what are you doing in response to that? Are you drafting another tight end? Are you signing another tight end? Are you investing more in your wide receiver position? And what we ended up seeing was they didn't bring in another tight end of note, with apologies to Luke Wilson, who was out there available for a reason, and he's never been a receiving tight end. And what we saw as far as the investment in the wide receiver position as a result or in response to that was a 3rd-round pick and a 6th-round pick, rookies. And let's face it, the Ravens don't have a good track record in identifying, drafting, developing wide receiver talent. We know that. So as I've seen that play out, it's felt very familiar. As different as Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco are as quarterbacks, and they couldn't be more different in terms of skill set, we're once again coming back to the question of wide receiver and the question of having enough weapons in the passing game. And that's where it feels a little deja vu-esque, where did they really learn from what happened with the post-Super Bowl Joe Flacco era? Or did this become a case of, we like Lamar Jackson, he's our new guy, and look, he was MVP of the league last year. I like Lamar Jackson a lot, but did we learn the lesson as an organization to make sure we have enough around him? And yeah, they drafted Marquise Brown, and that looked really good last year. This year hasn't looked so good for a 1st-round pick. Mark Andrews is terrific, but he's one guy. So who else is Lamar Jackson really relying on? So some of those deficiencies that you mentioned that were there last year, go look at his numbers if you really want to break it down, and how he threw outside the numbers, how he threw down the field. You'll find more similarities than you think, but it's just the overall product hasn't fit as well. All those puzzle pieces haven't come together in the same way, and then that exposes some of his deficiencies. They become a little more magnified as we've seen this year, rather than last year, where 36 touchdowns, 6 interceptions is
well, let's start
with
this. No Boyle, no Andrews, no Hayden Hurst. Playing with Luke, whatever his name is, not Luke Jones, and no Ronnie Stanley and no Marshall. I mean, there are a lot of pieces that, and I know when he got his MVP award, he thanked all his teammates and all. That was real. I mean, he's special and all that, but there needs to be other parts around him, or he's just a guy.
I disagree with that. He's special, period, because of what he does with his legs. But and that's always going to as long as he's healthy, and that'll be the big question in the long term as he gets as he's deeper into his career, has taken more hits cumulatively. Something that's been talked about with Cam Newton over the last 4 or 5 years, let's say, since
it
they
wrecked
went to a
Steve
Super Bowl.
McNair's career, right? I mean, it wrecked Steve Young's career, right?
Running
around.
But with him being able to run around and with his legs, he's special. We don't need to say but he's special with that by itself, because he does that at such a unique level. So that's always going to elevate his floor. However, if we're going to talk about how high his ceiling is ultimately going to be, I think last year when you saw how he played and you saw how this passing game was able to function at such a high efficient level, you were hoping that there was going to be even another level with him as a passer. That's not to say that won't happen, but seeing what's happened this year, that makes you wonder if last year was the absolute ceiling. And it speaks to how important all those pieces needing to be in place in order for this passing game to be successful. And then when, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but when you're thinking about it in the big picture, when you're at a point where whether he's making Patrick Mahomes money or Deshaun Watson money, wherever he fits into that, he's going to be near the top. How effectively can you put all those other pieces in place to have that highly functioning, efficient passing game that we saw a year ago? Hasn't worked out as well that way this year. So
we'll work on getting DeAndre Hopkins next year.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But as it relates to this year and going back to your original point, and based on what we saw on Tuesday night, I love the touchdown pass to Marquise Brown. Look, if teams aren't going to cover Miles Boykin at all, yeah, Lamar Jackson's they're going to be successful, but teams are typically going to do better than that in coverage. And if you're going to ask me right now if I think this passing game, look, they ran for almost 300 yards. That part of it, their running game hasn't been 2019, but it's still one of the best running games in the league. So we knew that. But is that special enough to overcome what's been a below average passing attack? No, it's not. And we know throwing the ball is that important in this league. So that's
I know what they won't overcome. It won't overcome a 10-point deficit in the fourth quarter.
Well, and
that's saying we run the ball.
But even if you're not facing a deficit, even if it's one of those cases where it's one of those toe-to-toe kind of games, and we've seen some teams do a much better job against their running game than teams did last year. Let's just talk about it in those terms. You have to be able to throw the football in this league. You just do. You're not going to find the 2000 Ravens formula does not work in the NFL 20 years later. I mean, it just doesn't. You have to be able to throw the football at a higher level than the Ravens are right now. It doesn't mean you have to be the best, but it's got to be better than it's been. And, on Tuesday night, did I expect to see Lamar throw for 350? No, because he was just coming back, barely practiced.
That's not what they were going to try to do.
They're missing wide receivers. They're missing their one tight end that they actually have at this point that's not someone off the street. So I wasn't expecting that. But in terms of where they are and what they need to do over the next 4 weeks, and if they do get in making noise, if you're asking me if I have enough confidence in the passing game to check all those boxes, I don't at this point. And it's not even as much a Lamar thing as it's just a systemic thing at this point as it relates to this team from the coaching staff on down to whoever's lining up at wide receiver or whoever's lining up at right guard every week.
Luke Jones is here. You can find him at Baltimore Luke. We're going to come back and talk more about Des Bryant and the dirty test and what that means. It's 6 days rest for the Browns and more about Lamar Jackson. You can find us out at Baltimore Positive. We have a brand new website. We have an incredible deal on ice cream. We're saving you $15.70 delivered to your door, just $40, 30 cents, 8 pints. You pick the pints. It's a lot of fun. Your kids can help you out and pick it. Just use the Baltimore Positive code when you're doing that. We have great sponsors everywhere. Planet Fitness, doing it safely. We had the Brick family on last week. Our friends at Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. I did not get the chicken. We had chicken on Sunday. for football. Tuesday night, I actually went down to Pizza John's, and I know you don't want to hear this, Luke, but I grabbed a pepperoni mushroom pizza. My wife got the onions on her half. I had half a cheesesteak. I was a little late tweeting because I was eating my cheesesteak, and I had the juices of the cheesesteak on my fingers at the beginning of the game, right around 8:05 on Tuesday night. So I got some leftovers as well. We have great sponsors here. If you need to ship crab cakes, our friends at Fadley's will do that for you through the holidays. You can click on the website and do that as well. So please take care of our sponsors. Please think locally here as we get ready for the Christmas and holiday season, or as I call it, the eggnog season. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking. Baltimore positive.